The hostess didn't even bother to hide the smirk on her face. She looked him up and down. Creased gray t-shirt, scuffed sneakers, sweatpants that hung loose on a frame too large for any chair in this Beverly Hills restaurant. Then came the question, "Are you sure you can afford to dine here?" The room didn't stop, but it shifted. A few heads turned. A spoon clinked loudly against porcelain. A laugh from a far table caught in someone's throat and vanished. The man didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't flash a wallet or announce his name. He just smiled, a small, quiet smile, and said, "I'd like a table, please." She didn't move, just stared at him, like he'd tracked in dirt on a white carpet. But she led him anyway. Past the golden chandeliers, past men in tailored tuxedos and women in silk dresses worth more than his entire outfit. Straight to the back, near the kitchen, next to a flickering light bulb and a half-cracked wall sconce. She dropped the menu on the table a little too hard, leaned in, and whispered, "Try not to waste our time." Then she turned and walked away. No one stopped her. No one spoke up. No one told her she was out of line. Because in that moment, everyone made the same silent assumption, that the man with the towering frame and the worn shoes didn't belong. They didn't know he was Shaquille O'Neal. They didn't know he owned the restaurant. And they definitely didn't know they were about to witness something unforgettable. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a reckoning in disguise. Because sometimes the richest man in the room is the one they treat like nothing. And when that man stays silent, not out of weakness, but out of power, he's not ignoring the insult. He's measuring the moment, waiting to see who they become when they realize the one they look down on was always looking right back at them. So here's the question. How would you treat someone if you didn't know who they were? La Lumiere wasn't just a restaurant. It was a monument, a temple to elegance built on $500 entrees, imported crystal stemware, and the kind of lighting that made everything and everyone look just a little more important. It sat on the corner of Rodeo and Illusion. Every night, a parade of high heels and cufflinks spilled through its glass doors like royalty. The wait list was 6 weeks long, unless you had a name worth dropping. And tonight, the room glowed. Wine swirled in glasses shaped like raindrops. A soft jazz quartet played notes that kissed the air and vanished. Waitstaff moved like dancers, polished, practiced, perfectly in sync. Emma stood behind the front podium, her hair pulled tight into a ballet bun, not a strand out of place. To her, this place wasn't just work, it was status. She'd spent years perfecting the smile, the tone, the art of knowing which guests were worthy of table 5 by the window, and which ones were better off near the kitchen. And tonight, when she saw him walk in, the choice was easy. Tall, too tall, wearing a faded t-shirt that didn't know a tailor's touch. Shoes that looked like they'd walked more than they'd ever been polished. He didn't check the reservation list, just asked politely for a table. Emma barely concealed the scoff in her throat. He wasn't rude. He wasn't loud. He didn't smell like money or drop the kind of last name that made managers stand up straighter. He was just casual. Too casual. And in La Lumiere, that was a sin. Still she smiled, thin, empty. "This way," she said, and led him through the garden of clinking forks and murmured deals, past the lawyers, the influencers, the low-level celebrities snapping wine selfies in velvet booths. She walked fast, didn't check if he followed, didn't explain the menu, didn't offer water, and when she placed the menu on the table, she did it like it was a favor. "Hope this suits your style." She thought she'd made her point, that he'd feel the weight of eyes, the whispers rising behind linen napkins, that he'd excuse himself, quietly, and vanish back out the door he came through. But he didn't. He just sat, straight-backed, relaxed, not embarrassed, not intimidated, almost amused. That made her nervous, and she didn't know why. Because in her world, men like that didn't belong in places like this. But the thing about assumptions, they don't ask for permission, and they don't warn you before they implode. Emma returned with a menu in one hand and judgment in the other. She didn't offer wine pairings, didn't explain the specials. She didn't even ask his name. Instead, she pointed to the most expensive item. Filet mignon Rossini. $350, she said. Her tone syrupy but laced with mockery. Most guests prefer something more modest. He looked up, unbothered. I'll take it, he replied, his voice low, calm, like someone who'd never once been rattled by a price tag. Emma blinked. That wasn't the reaction she expected. He didn't flinch. Didn't ask about portions or sauces or substitutions. He just ordered like the number didn't matter. That annoyed her more than she could explain. So she leaned in a little closer. It's a dish for connoisseurs. Not everyone can appreciate it. Still no reaction, just that same patient smile. And then he said, I think I'll enjoy it. It wasn't defiance. It was worse. It was grace. And that shook her. Because grace was supposed to belong to her kind of guest, not his. Emma turned, heels clicking too hard against the hardwood. She didn't take his drink order. Didn't offer bread. She went straight to the back and whispered loudly enough for half the staff to hear. He doesn't belong here. Watch. He'll vanish before the check arrives. Jake, the host in training, gave her a nervous glance. He seems polite, he said. Emma rolled her eyes. That's the problem. The polite ones think they can blend in. Back at table 23, he sat alone, still, composed. He clapped once for the jazz band, thanked the busboy who filled his water, nodded at the older couple 2 tables over when they gave him a curious glance. He never once looked uncomfortable, and that somehow made everyone else feel it instead. By the time the filet arrived, the restaurant had changed. Not loudly, quietly. The way rooms shift when something real is happening. The way tension sneaks in, not with shouting, but with silence that gets noticed. Emma dropped the plate with a little too much force. Bon appétit, she muttered, not meaning it. He simply smiled. But before he could lift his fork, another voice entered the scene. Firm, authoritative, surprised. Shaquille? Emma froze. The manager, Mr. Thompson, stood across the room, recognition dawning across his face like sunrise. Shaq, we didn't know you were coming tonight. A pause, and then the words that cracked through the room like thunder. Ladies and gentlemen, you are in the presence of one of the owners of La Lumière. Emma went pale. Not a subtle flush, not a quiet gasp. Pale, like someone had yanked the floor from under her stilettos. Owner? Owner. She stared at Mr. Thompson as if he'd spoken a foreign language. But the murmurs growing behind her confirmed she'd heard right. A man in a designer suit at table 6 leaned toward his wife. Did he just say Shaquille O'Neal owns this place? Her eyes widened. That's Shaq? Across the dining room, forks paused mid-air. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the jazz trio stuttered their rhythm for a beat. Emma's knees nearly gave out. Her mind scrambled through every insult she had whispered, every condescending glance she thought had gone unnoticed. And now, every single one echoed in full view. Shaq sat calmly, still in that modest corner, still dressed in that humble gray t-shirt. But now, the glow of power had shifted. No longer the man being judged. Now the man judging. He stood slowly, graceful, measured, and tall. Not just in height, but in presence. He didn't look angry. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned to Emma, and spoke so softly the entire room leaned in to hear. "Miss, what's your name?" Emma swallowed hard. Emma." He nodded once, slowly, then said, "Emma, how long have you worked here?" 5 years. "And in those 5 years, is this how you usually greet guests who don't wear Armani?" A ripple moved through the room, half gasp, half grim smile. She couldn't answer, didn't dare. Shaq turned to Mr. Thompson. "Would you mind gathering the staff after close?" Mr. Thompson nodded instantly. "Of course, absolutely." Emma stood frozen. The tray in her hand now felt like a spotlight. But it wasn't over, because Shaq wasn't done teaching. He turned back to the diners, his voice still calm, but every word hitting with weight. "I came here tonight to enjoy a meal in peace. I didn't ask for a show." He glanced around the room, but maybe this was the right place for one. Every head in the room turned toward Emma, not with rage, but with realization. And then applause. It started from the Carter couple in the middle of the room, spread to the jazz band, then the tables near the window, until every corner of the restaurant rang with a slow, deliberate clapping that said, "We see what just happened, and we know who really showed class." Emma lowered her eyes, and for the first time in 5 years, she felt small. Not because of his fame, but because of her own failure. The applause eventually faded, but the lesson lingered, humming in the walls of La Lumière like a low, persistent echo. Emma backed away slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. She slipped into the hallway behind the wine cellar, where the staff lockers were, and sat on the edge of a bench, trembling. Outside, Shaq returned to his seat. Calm, silent, still hungry, but things were moving now. Faster than anyone could see. Because Mr. Thompson wasn't just the restaurant manager, he was also the front-facing partner of a quiet partnership. And behind that polished smile, he was already dialing numbers. The first, to the operations director at Lumiere Holdings. The second, to HR. The third, a personal voicemail to Shaq himself. Back in the dining room, conversations had turned from whispers to full-blown re-evaluations. Lisa, the young entrepreneur at table 4, leaned over to her friend again. "I Googled it," she whispered. "He owns a stake in the whole franchise." Her friend blinked. "Wait, not just this restaurant?" "Nope, the whole group, Beverly Hills, Manhattan, Miami." A pause. Then, "And Emma just tried to humiliate the boss." In the far booth, Mr. Carter shook his head in quiet amazement. Every so often, he said softly to his wife, "Someone thinks they can act like gatekeepers. Then the real gatekeeper walks through the door." But the real story wasn't about Shaq's money, or even his influence. It was what he chose to do next. Because after dinner, he didn't storm out. He didn't demand she be fired. He asked to speak with the entire staff. And when the chandeliers dimmed low, and the last guest exited with a nod and a half-whispered, "That was incredible," Shaq stood at the center of the now empty dining room and started the real conversation. The staff circled around him, some curious, others cautious. Emma hung in the back, half hidden by a wine shelf. Shaq didn't raise his voice, didn't shame anyone. He just told a story about the first time he was ever underestimated, about a coach who judged his smarts because he stumbled over a playbook, about a meeting he walked into wearing jeans, only to be mistaken for a driver, and about how each time he remembered the same sentence his mother once told him. The most powerful man in the room is the one who doesn't need to prove he belongs there. Then he looked up and said the words that cracked the room wide open. "This place, this whole restaurant, will not survive on excellence alone." He scanned their faces. "It will survive on respect, or not at all." Mr. Thompson nodded, his throat tight. Jake, the younger waiter who had witnessed Emma's behavior, looked like he'd just exhaled for the first time all night. And Emma, Her eyes began to sting. She realized in that moment it wasn't just her mistake. It was the culture she had helped uphold. And the man she tried to dismiss? He had just redefined what power actually looked like. By the time dawn rolled across Beverly Hills, the internet had already turned La Lumiere into a national headline. Not because of a brawl, not because of a scandal, but because a man walked into a restaurant, was insulted, said almost nothing, and still flipped the script. A TikTok clip with 12 seconds of the incident had already hit 4 million views. Emma's voice sneering. "Would you like me to explain the prices?" Shaq's answer, calm. "No, thank you. I'll take the filet mignon rosini." No raised voice, no pushback, just dignity. And the internet noticed. On Reddit, threads exploded. Waiter insults Shaq, realizes he owns the place. On YouTube, reaction channels broke down the moment frame by frame. Commentators analyzed Emma's body language like a political scandal. Respect over arrogance. Shaq's silences. Hate. La Lumiere lesson. Hashtags that started trending on X by noon. But this wasn't just viral fodder. It was personal. Former patrons of La Lumiere started chiming in. A woman named Anita posted a story on Instagram. "She looked me up and down when I brought my mom here for her 70th birthday. I remember how small I felt. Now I know I wasn't imagining it." Another. "I'm not black, I'm Latina." Same attitude, same smile with the edge. That place needed a mirror held up to it. Internally, the company scrambled. The PR team worked overtime. Statements were drafted, scrapped, rewritten. Should they fire Emma? Should they announce Shaq's ownership? But the man himself wasn't pressing charges, wasn't calling for heads to roll. Instead, he asked to lead a staff-wide workshop, privately. No cameras, no posts, just learning, and that unsettled them more. Meanwhile, Emma, her world shrank fast. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Old friends, news stations, even her mother. But she didn't reply. She sat on her apartment floor, the TV off, the blinds drawn, clutching her server notebook like it was a lifeline from another life. Outside, reporters hovered near the restaurant's rear entrance. Jake, the younger server, tried to walk past them. "You work here? Was it as bad as they say?" He didn't stop, just muttered, "Worse than you think, but better now." And inside the restaurant, something was shifting. The team wasn't scared. They were energized. Training sessions became conversations. Meetings stopped being polite, started being honest. And for the first time in months, some of the newer hires spoke up about the small things, the lingering glances, the subtle tone, the things no one ever put in a complaint form, but everyone felt. Because one man didn't react with fury, he responded with focus. And now, the real work had just begun. The next week felt like a slow burn. Emma reported back to work. No announcement. No apology posted on social media. But when she walked through the staff entrance, every eye followed her, not with hatred, not even with pity, just awareness. Awareness of who she had been and who she might now become. She'd cut her hair, showed up early, stayed late, didn't ask for sympathy, didn't offer excuses. She just listened. To the new floor manager. To the quietest servers. To the dishwasher named Arturo, who'd been with the place longer than most of the chefs. She wiped tables now with a different energy. One that didn't look down, but saw. But that grace came at a price. Emma's face had become a meme. On one side of the internet, she was vilified. On the other, ridiculed. A YouTube video titled "Shaq's Calm Destroyed a Racist Waitress" had 8 million views in 48 hours. People she didn't even know recognized her on the street. "You're the one who insulted Shaq, right?" She'd nod. Or walk away. Or sometimes, just cry. And yet, Shaq never said her name publicly. Never posted a single word about the incident. His silence wasn't erasure. It was discipline, because the goal was never to destroy her. It was to reveal something larger. And it worked. Restaurant owners across LA began rethinking their training protocols. One high-end establishment brought in DEI specialists for the first time. Others started mystery audits. Not for food, but for fairness. Shaq, he kept showing up at Lumiere, unannounced, not to check on Emma, but to see if the soul of the place had changed. He'd sit at a new table each time, sometimes near the bar, sometimes close to the kitchen, and every time he left a generous tip and a quiet smile, until one night, after closing, Emma found the courage to walk up to his table. No audience, no camera, just the two of them. "I don't know if I'll ever deserve your grace," she said, eyes lowered. Shaq looked up, folded his napkin, and answered, "Then live like you do." No speech, no lecture, just a sentence, simple and heavy. And that night, for the first time since it all began, Emma didn't cry when she got home. She slept, because redemption, real redemption, doesn't come from applause. It comes from the work after. And both of them, the NBA legend and the fallen server, had done it. In their own ways. The chandelier lights dimmed for the final time that night. La Lumiere closed its doors, but something stayed behind. Not the scent of truffle oil, not the clink of polished glasses, but the echo of a lesson. A lesson spoken not in anger, but in presence. Shaq never raised his voice. He never needed to. Because sometimes, the most powerful revolution begins with silence that refuses to stay invisible. Across the city, whispers became conversations. In cafes, strangers debated what dignity should look like. In restaurants, managers rewrote their staff manuals. In classrooms, professors played the clip. Not for the scandal, but for the stillness. Because that's what made the moment matter. Shaq didn't clap back. He didn't flex. He stood still. And that stillness reflected every face in the room. The arrogant, the silent, the complicit, the ashamed, the redeemed. Emma's story became a parable, not of disgrace, but of how fast the world turns when you're not ready to grow with it. And how forgiveness, real forgiveness, is not a free pass. It's a heavy torch passed into trembling hands. As for Shaq, he walked away that night with no victory speech, no news conference, no captioned post saying, "I showed them." Just a quiet glance back at a restaurant he once walked into, seen. And now, it sees everyone. La Lumiere didn't just change its policy, it changed its soul, because it had to. Because one man reminded them that class isn't what you wear, it's what you withhold, when you have every right to strike back. And now we ask you, have you ever witnessed a moment like this, where someone flipped the script without raising their voice? Have you ever judged someone too quickly? Or been judged because you didn't look the part? This isn't just a story about a restaurant. It's a mirror, one we all need to look into more often. So before you scroll, before the next video rolls in, ask yourself, when power is in your hands, what will you do with it? And will your silence be a wall or a bridge? In a world that judges fast and listens slow, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not to shout louder, but to stand taller. At KaYi, we tell the stories others overlook, where justice whispers and dignity echoes louder than applause. If this story moved something in you, don't let it fade. Like, if you believe kindness is strength, share. If someone you know needs to see this, subscribe. If you're ready for more stories that don't just entertain, but awaken something deeper. And remember, you don't need a title to lead, just the courage to stand still when the world tells you to walk away. Until next time, Stay kind, stay curious, and never stop listening. KaYi, stories that speak truth.